When I was first brainstorming the plot to Truth Curse, I was really looking for some kind of an obstacle or an affliction or a curse that would follow my main character around continuously. Something she would have to constantly work to overcome or figure out how to work around. I think the idea for the Truth Curse itself came from the idea of social anxiety and my own experience with it. You know that feeling when you've said too much, you've said the wrong thing, you've overshared, and it's such a humiliating feeling. Just the idea of being forced to respond to every question completely bluntly and candidly just really spoke to my sense of embarrassment. And I felt like I could work with that. Now, the idea for the spy school developed very organically as two characters are having a conversation, as many of my plot points come about that way. And it just came to be the spy school. And that just seemed to really work with the Truth Curse to create high stakes and tension. I used to be scared away from writing because I felt like to begin, you had to have a really strong, detailed, solid outline, and outlining has just never been my strong suit. And it's really hard to begin something if you feel like you're doing it wrong. However, the more I researched the methods of other authors, it finally began to sink in that there is more than one way to write a book, and I just had to find out what my way was. And so finally, I realized that I am a discovery writer. I developed my method of brainstorming along the way, keeping very detailed notes full of inspiration and setting and characters and possible things that could happen. And I find the plot along the way. And then I revise very heavily. And often the ideas keep flowing during the revision stage, which, often makes me wonder, where were those ideas at the beginning? But that's okay. It's a good problem to have. And I just have to manage continuity and edit until it's really tight. I am fairly simple. I love my hot drinks. And if it's morning when I'm writing, I like to have black coffee. And if it's later in the day, I will drink a nice hot Earl Grey black tea. However, if I am out of the house, like writing at a coffee shop, for example, I do like to get a fun iced drink now and then. I like a nice iced London Fog or a bubble tea or a hazelnut latte or something like that. I'm a huge fan of the Chronicles of Narnia. I have been reading this series over and over again ever since I was a little girl, and it will always be magical to me. So I believe that Cressida would love it as well. And I think if we could both go to Narnia, it would be really hard to choose which lands to see, which characters to visit. I think Aslan would be a given, but I do believe that Cressida would love to meet Reepicheep the mouse, and I think that they would bond over their love of threatening people with swords. I think that this blend of fantasy with fairy tale vibes and just an amalgam of different time periods and history just blended together is what you would get if you peered inside my brain and just smashed together all of the stories and movies, books that I inhaled as a kid. I just gravitated towards things that were fairy tale, fantasy, historical, and yeah, that was definitely what I had in my brain as I was writing Truth Cursed. Faith played a part throughout the entire process because it had to. I doubted myself every step of the way, and I knew that if this was ever going to turn into a cohesive story, that it was going to be because the Lord was coming alongside me. But I do remember a time when I was really wrestling with all the tangles and knots of the web that I had woven and struggling to see how I was going to get through it when I started to feel peace and clarity. And I began to see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel and just see that story, how it was going to unfurl. And I knew that the Lord had given me this story to enjoy and to share. And right now it's easy to say in retrospect that it was all meant to work out. However, at the time, I just had to grasp at those moments of clarity and hope and keep trusting. I have been into swords and daggers my entire life, ever since I was a little girl. My favorite movies to watch were Zorro and old Errol Flynn swashbucklers and The Princess Bride, because I just love that fencing scene. But fast forward a few years to college, and I met a very cute young man in my class who had a secret hobby. He was an amateur sword expert. This kid had inhaled every book on the subject of historical weaponry. He had built his own forge and he was making his own chainmail. So, yeah, nerd alert in the best possible way. I was not going to let this guy go. So, yeah, now we are married. We have 4 kids and a very substantial sword collection. These are a couple of my favorites because I just love rapiers and daggers. But yes, I absolutely love being married to a sword expert. I love having his invaluable wisdom and knowledge at my disposal while I'm writing. And he has always been there to make sure I get it right. So yeah, I will probably always be including some blades in my stories. Getting stuck is so frustrating, but I try not to get discouraged because I know that it's going to happen. It's just part of the writing process. I've gotten stuck over and over again, and I've eventually developed a rule for myself, and that is to just write something within my story world. It does not have to be in sequence. It does not have to be the problem that I am working through at the moment. But if it's in the story world, sometimes from a different character's perspective, sometimes something that will never be featured or never end up in the book at all, it's going to keep my creativity flowing. It's going to keep the writing going, and it's going to help me eventually get back to that problem and see the path forward. This is my cat, Nimue. No, she's not particularly helpful when I write. She likes to sit in my chair. She likes to get into my neck like this, and she likes to read over my shoulder, which is a big pet peeve of mine. However, she's great for bouncing ideas off of, and she is a sweetie. I may have had a little bit too much fun putting Cressida into embarrassing and dangerous situations because of the truth curse, but I really did feel for her, and sometimes I let her off the hook. Sometimes the things that she feared or worried that somebody was going to ask her remained just a fear and it never happened. But more often than not, she finds herself in a sticky situation. At the beginning, she thinks to herself about how she has embarrassed herself hundreds of times, and it never gets any easier. And you know after you read that she's in for a rough time. So, when it came time to discuss a map for Truth Cursed, I decided I wanted to ask my husband Dan if he would consider creating that map. He said, why not? And so I took that idea to my publisher, and they were really cool about that idea, and they said they would love to see what he could come up with. Dan is a sword expert, he loves history, he's very creative, he dabbles in blacksmithing on the side, and I just knew that his touch is what my book needed. And so this is what he came up with. And I just think this is such a great map. It works really well for the story. It's really cute. It was really fun to discuss the topography and the archaeology that I had in mind for this story and see how that played out in his vision. And we were able to hide an Easter egg or two in here, and we just had a really good time making this map. As I was thinking about my hobbies, I realized that I'm actually a very hobbity sort of person. I like to do hobbity things. When I'm not reading or writing or editing or homeschooling my kids, I like to garden, I like to bake, I like to curl up by the fire with a cup of tea. I just like to spend time with my family, celebrating a simple life, reading about going on adventures, maybe occasionally going on them, but generally I like to be home and, having a good second breakfast. When I was a kid, I loved to read in many genres, including fantasy, classics, historical fiction, mysteries, fairy tales, and not much has changed. I will read in any of these genres still from young adult on up. Well, the overall premise of A Truth Curse and the Spy Who Cannot Lie seemed to present me with infinite challenges. I had intended those challenges to be for my character to solve, but it turns out I have to be able to solve the problems that I create. Not only that, but I did find it very challenging as a character driven discovery writer to write what was essentially a mystery. I felt that I needed to have more of a plot driven, meticulous, detail oriented, outlining sort of writing style, which I simply didn't have. I eventually had quite a bit of fun with it, but I did find it difficult to keep my character's motivation steady while also keeping the reader guessing. What I loved the most about writing Truth Curse was Cressida. I loved developing her voice and finding her personality and just exploring the different ways that the curse affected her and the way that she overcame her challenges. And I just really enjoyed writing the whole cast of characters alongside her. And of course, I love writing the weapons. Thank you so much for watching this interview. I cannot tell you how thankful and excited I am for you to read Truth Curse. If you love historically inspired light fantasy with mystery and cloak and dagger court intrigue, secrets, spies, and flawed yet lovable characters, I think you're going to love Truth Curse, releasing from Enclave Publishing on February 18th.